Hi everyone, welcome back to Varsity Cheer Podcast episode 05, and I'm your host for today, Richard. Today, we are going to tackle a fascinating and important topic in our room, federalism in Malaysia. Before we dive into today's discussion on federalism and the structure of legislative powers in Malaysia, let me introduce our friendly panelists who are willing to spend their time to share their thoughts on today's topic. First, we have panelist 1, Junwei. Second, we have panelist 2, Kuaila. And thirdly, we have panelist 3, Hazira. All three of our panelists today are from the same faculty, which is School of Law. What a glad moment for our podcast room to have lawyers in the house. So let's give them a round of applause. Today, they will guide us through Malaysia's journey from a union to a federation, discussing disputes among federal and states, and also highlight key moments that shape our federal system. With such a brilliant lineup, I'm sure today's discussion will be enlightening. Let's get started. So let us welcome our first panelist, Junwei.
Hi, Richard, and hi, everyone who are listening to today's podcast. It's nice to meet you all, and it's my great pleasure to become one of the panelists today.
Sounds nice. So, Junwei, let's start off very quick. The federalism basically means dividing powers between the federal government and the state government. Each level has its own responsibility, but in practice, it's not always that straightforward. Here's a quick question for you before we dive deeper. Did you know Malaysia didn't start as a federation?
Yeah, definitely. Malaysia initially was started with Malayan Union in 1946, which was complete disasters because it stripped states from their sovereignty. That backlash is what led to Federation of Malaya in 1948, which states regained some autonomy after that.
Exactly. The Malayan Union didn't work because the states felt sidelined. So the Federation of Malaya struck a better balance. But Junwei, how did things change in 1963 when Malaysia was formed?
When Malaysia was formed in 1963, Sabah, Sarawak and Singapore joined. This region had very different needs compared to the peninsular states. To address this, the federal system gave Sabah and Sarawak special power under the Malaysia Agreement 1963. For example, they control immigration and have more to say over their resources. This was to ensure they felt included in the federation.
Interesting. So, federalism wasn't just about governance, it was about making sure everyone felt fairly represented. Kuala, what were the main reasons Malaysia chose federalism over other systems?
Okay, great question, Richard. One big reason why Malaysia chose federalism was because regional diversity. Malaysia isn't one size fit all. Peninsular states Sabah and Sarawak have different languages, cultures, and economics. So, a centralized system would have ignored these differences. Plus, federalism allowed the state to keep control over things that mattered locally like land and religion, while the federal government handled big picture stuff like defense and foreign relations. So, it was a way to balance the unity and local autonomy.
That's a smart approach. So, federalism is about sharing power to match the diversity of the country. But here's when it gets tricky. How is this power sharing actually organized? Azira, can you break down the structure of the power to us?
Sure thing. Thanks to Junwei and Kuala for the brief history of how Malaysia adopted federalism. Back to the question, the structure of the power in Malaysia is divided into three lists under the Federal Constitution. So the first one is federal list, which consists things like defense, education, and finance. The federal government has full control here. The second one is state list. This includes land, forestry, and Islamic law. States handle these matters on their own. So the third one is concurrent list. These are shared areas like public health, housing, and society welfare. Both federal and state government can make laws, but if there's a clash, federal law takes priority.
Great examples. Thank you to Junwei, Kuala, and Hazira for the introduction. So, federalism is like sharing a house. Everyone has their own room, but actually, I'm willing to listen to more details and clarifications on how these lists work. Now, let's dive into an essential topic: the balance of power between federal and state governments in Malaysia. To better understand this, let's briefly go over each legislative list. Junwei, can you start us off?
In Malaysia, the legislative powers are divided into three categories as specified in the 9th schedule of the Federal Constitution: the Federal List, State List, and Concurrent List. The Federal List encompasses major areas like defense, finance, and foreign policy. For example, the federal government is responsible for national security and managing armed forces, ensuring a strong defense system for the country. It also oversees financial matters such as taxations, public loans, the management of national public funds, which are critical to running the country efficiently. These responsibilities highlight the centralized authority of federal government in safeguarding the national interests.
Interesting. Now, let's move to the state list. Koala, can you tell us about state powers?
Okay, absolutely. The state list primarily gives states the authority over matters such as Islamic law, land, and also local governance. So one crucial area is Islamic law, where states have the autonomy to legislate and govern. However, there's a key distinction when it comes to federal territories like Kuala Lumpur, Putrajaya, and Labuan, which don't have a sultan as the head of Islam. In this area, the federal government take charge. This was evident in the case of Mahmad bin Daud versus Government of Malaysia, which highlight how Islamic provisions applied exclusively to federal territories, not state. So these dual governance will ensure the Islamic matters are tailored to unique governance, structures of state while respecting the federal oversight in specific regions.
Well, that's a great example. Now, what about areas where federal and state governments share authority? Hazira, any insights from you?
Of course, these shared responsibilities fall under the concurrent list, which includes areas like social welfare, public health, and wildlife protection. For instance, the federal government launched nationwide programs like Sumbangan Tunai Rahmah, aimed at providing financial aid. Meanwhile, states also play a role in addressing local needs through federal allocations. Take for example, initiative like Bantuan IPT, where states provide support for university students tailored to their specific communities. This cooperation ensures both levels of government work together to address national priorities while also catering to local concerns. It's a balance of power that supports the need of all Malaysians.
Actually, the example about Bantuan IPT correlates with me a lot, especially having a friend where the amount of money he receives for assistance is different compared to the amount of what I receive in my state, Kedah. I need to admit that this initiative under concurrent list has abruptly helped in improving the livelihoods and welfare of students alike. So once again, thank you for the illustration on all the she lists. We will take a short break before we dive into cases. Welcome back, everyone, to Varsity Chill Podcast. And we still have Junwei, Kuaila, and Hazira as our panelists on the same content. So once again, I want to thank you for the clarification on the divisions of power. After having some understanding into all three lists under the legislative power, now it's time for us to step on real grass. Let's discuss the news that happens to trigger a huge conflict, which is the renowned Nik Alin Zurina Nik Abdul Rashid and Kelantan state government, which is a federal state dispute over Kelantan's attempt to enforce hudud law. Let's break it down step by step. Junwei, can you explain what triggered this case?
Sure, Richard. The case started when Kelantan state government passed the Sharia Criminal Code 2 Amendment 2015. This law introduced Islamic criminal punishment like amputations and stoning. The issue was that this punishment originally fall under criminal law, which is listed in the federal list under the constitution. But Kelantan claimed it had authority under the state list, which covers Islamic law.
Interesting. Thanks, Junwei. So, Kuala, why does this become a federal issue?
Okay, well, while state can legislate on Islamic law, the punishment Kelantan introduced are criminal in nature. The Federal Constitution clearly state that criminal law is under federal jurisdiction. So, Kelantan was seen as overstepping its boundaries.
Got it. So this created a clash between Kelantan's power as a state and the federal government's authority. Hazira, how did the legal proceedings unfold?
The case was brought to court by several lawyers, including Nick Allen. They argued that Kelantan's hudud law conflicted with the federal constitution. Kelantan defended itself by saying Islamic law is a state matter, so they had the right to implement it. The federal side responded that punishment like amputation and stoning clearly fall under criminal law, not religious or personal law. The constitution doesn't allow states to legislate on criminal matters.
Makes sense. Thanks, Hazira, for explaining the legal proceedings. After that, Junwei, can you tell us what's the court's ruling?
The court ruled in the favor of federal government. It declared Kelantan law was unconstitutional, stating that the state cannot pass law on criminal matters since it's under the federal jurisdictions. For example, for the same case of sodomy, the criminal, if being punished under Sharia law under legislation of Kelantan, will only receive sanction of imprisonment for 3 years, which is obviously biased and unfair compared to same offense if being granted the sanction of imprisonment for maximum 30 years under the federal constitution penal code. So, at the end, either it is for the justice of jurisdictions or the priority of federal and state lists, the federal government should prevail.
Other than that, it reaffirms the limits of state powers under the federal constitution. While states have control over Islamic law, they can't encroach into areas like criminal law, which remain under federal control. It's a reminder of how crucial the division of power is in maintaining the Malaysia federal structure.
I see. Thanks, everyone, for breaking that down so clearly. The Nick Allen case really highlights the delicate balance in our federal system and how important it is to stick to the Constitution. So, audience in front of the screen, do take note of the current issues that are happening in our country. After having a deep look into the Nick Allen Zurina case, now let us dive into another federal state dispute that raised key constitutional questions, the case of Pihak Berkuasa Negeri Sabah and Suguma Balakrishnan. This case deals with Sabah's authority over immigration and the extent of federal oversight. To set the stage, Koila, can you explain the main facts of the case?
Of course, this case revolves around Sabah immigration powers, which are unique under the federal constitution. So, Suguma Balakrishnan is actually a peninsular Malaysian lawyer, had his entry permit to Sabah being revoked by the state authorities. He challenged this decision, arguing that it was made without giving him the chance to defend himself and violated his constitutional rights under the Article 5, which is the liberty of the person, and also the Article 8, which is the equality before the law. So, Sabah defend its decision, claiming its special autonomy over immigration under the Federal Constitution, particularly under Section 67 of the Immigration Act 1959, so which allows Sabah and Sarawak to control entry into their territories. So, the federal state tension arose because Suguma claimed that the state decision infringed on federal constitutional right, while Sabah argued that it was acted within its legal authority.
Thanks for laying that out. So, Junwei, what's your perspective on this dispute?
This case highlights the delicates between states' autonomy and individuals' rights. Sabah immigration powers are special concession means to protect its unique demographics and interests. But in this case, the lack of procedural fairness, Suguma wasn't given a chance to contest in the decision, make it seems like Sabah power wasn't used transparently. On one hand, the state like Sabah have the right to protect their interests, but on the other hand, the procedural fairness is a cornerstone of the federation. I feel the decision-making process should have been more inclusive.
Good point about the procedural fairness. Hazira, Did you see this differently?
I do actually, slightly, because Sabah's autonomy over immigration is crucial to its identity within the federation. This power is a hard-earned right under the Malaysia Agreement 1963, and undermining it could weaken the state's role in the federal structure. While I agree with procedural fairness is important, federal court should tread carefully in interfering with state decision. If every dispute like this were overturned on constitutional grounds, it might erode the autonomy of states like Sabah and Sarawak.
Thank you, Hajira. So actually, we are looking at two sides. The importance of upholding state autonomy versus ensuring procedural fairness and individual rights. Kuela, what did the court ultimately decide?
Okay, actually, the court sided with Sabah, affirming its authority to revoke Suguma's entry permit. It emphasized that the state immigration powers are clearly outlined in the federal constitution and federal laws.
Thanks, Kuela, for peeling down the court's decision. So actually, Sabah's right to control immigration was upheld. But this case seems to bring up deeper questions. So, Hazira, how does this case reflect broader issues of state autonomy?
So for the broader implication, this case is a perfect example of why Sabah and Sarawak continue to push for greater respect for MA 63, which is Malaysia Agreement. The ruling reaffirmed the special position of Sabah and its right to control its border, which is crucial for protecting its cultural and economic interests. But here's the issue. Cases like this keep happening because there's a lack of clarity on where federal and state powers begin and end. Sabah should not have to fight court battles to enforce right it already has under MA 63. This constant push and pull creates unnecessary tension between the federal and state government.
Great points, both of you. Let's shift to solutions. How do we address these recurring conflicts? Junwei,
Well, I think Sabah should set up a transparent immigration review process. This will allow individuals to appeal bans while ensuring that the state's autonomy is not compromised. It balances the state rights with constitutional protections and avoids the perception of unfairness.
interesting. So I think we should mark a stop for this case. Thanks for Junwei, Kuela, and Hazira for explaining and underlining the importance of state autonomy. So all in all, mutual respect should be given in order to foster a better federal state understanding. And we as citizens should be aware of this change as well. So after we discuss disputes between federal and state matters, I think we should also have a look on state and state disputes. Hazira, actually, I came across an article about the ongoing dispute between Kedah and Penang over water usage rights. Could you explain the key policy issues involved and their broader implications?
Certainly, Richard. Kedah's government has announced plans to seek compensation from Penang for using water from the Sungai Muda River, which flows from Kedah into Penang. The disputes originates from the fact that Penang gets about 84% of its water supply from the Sungai Muda River, which originates in Kedah. So since 2010, Kedah has been asking Penang for compensation of about 50 million per year for using this water. However, Kedah has only signed written demands which are not legally binding. But this year, they are now pushing for legal action after Penang's Chief Minister, Chow Kun Yeow, insisted that the issue be resolved through the courts.
Okay, Hajira. So it seems like Penang is digging in its heel, asserting that the use of river water is legitimate. So, Junwei, in your point of view, how is Penang justifying its position?
Penang argues that their use of river is in line with international water sharing laws, which according to Penang, the water usage near the state's border is legally permissible, and the view of Kedah demand for compensation was unfounded. Penang Chief Minister has made it clear that if Kedah feels otherwise, they are welcome to take the matter to the court. Essentially, Penang sees this as a legal disagreement over water rights, and they believe that they are in the right.
Okay, thanks, Junwei. This seems like a complex issue, not just for the two states, but for regional governance of natural resources in general. What do you think, Kuala, regarding the wider implications of this dispute?
In my perspective, this case isn't just about water. It's about how shared natural resources are managed, especially when they cross state or even international borders. If Kedah wins, it could set a significant precedent for how states negotiate and enforce their right over rivers and other resources. It also highlights the challenges that comes with balancing economic interests, environmental sustainability, and also the legal frameworks when it comes to water management. So this kind of dispute could become more common as resources become limited and states become more protective of their environmental assets.
So it's certainly an issue to be taken into account, especially me myself as an authentic Kedahan. For the important as it is something that links with our state's right. As such, not only adults but youth should also be aware as well. Well, it is exhausting, right? After looking at all of the cases, federal state and state, but we never touch ground on the concurrent list issues. Let's start off it easily, okay? With a recent news to introduce disputes over the concurrent list. Just few weeks before, Terengganu announced a ban on shops selling vape products. This decision aligns with calls from the Pahang ruler urging a nationwide ban. Meanwhile, surprisingly, Johor was one of the first states to implement such a ban in 2015. Let's start by setting the stage. Junwei, could you explain whether vape regulation falls under federation or state jurisdiction?
Thank you, Richard. This topic is highly relevant and highlights the Malaysia unique federal system. Under the federal constitution, public health falls under the concurrent list, meaning that both federal and states government they have a power to legislate on it. However, the matters related to the offences and distribution, the sales and the regulation of products like vape, drugs, fall under the federal list. So, while the states may address the health-related concerns, a complete ban on vape products could potentially conflict with federal jurisdictions.
Interesting. Okay, so Kuala, considering Junwei's point, do states like Terengganu and Johor have the legal authority to enforce vape bans?
So it's a grey area. State like Terengganu justify these bans by citing public health and moral concern, which they can regulate under their state list powers, particularly concerning the local government and licensing. However, these bans often overlap with areas under federal authority. For instance, the federal government already regulates nicotine-based products under the Poison Act 1952 and the Control of Tobacco Product Regulations 2004. If a vape ban by a state conflicts with federal regulations or create undue burdens on interstate trade, it could be a challenge in court.
That's insightful. Thank you, Kuala. So, another question for Hazira. From a public health perspective, do you think states are justified in stepping in to ban vape products?
Yes, to an extent. States like Terengganu and Johor see vaping as a growing public health crisis, especially among youth. Without clear federal regulations on vaping, states are stepping in to protect their communities. However, while these efforts address immediate concerns, they risk creating inconsistencies. A patchwork of state bans can confuse consumers and businesses. For example, if you go to Kedah, you can vaping, but if you go to Perlis, you cannot. So it kind of lead to confusion among the consumers. This is why we need federal leadership to implement comprehensive and uniform regulations for vaping.
Thank you, Hazira. So, Junwei, last question. What happens if more states enact vape bans? Could this lead to jurisdictional disputes between the state and federal government?
Absolutely. If more states follow Terengganu's and Johor's leads, we could see legal disputes arise. Businesses might challenge the state bans, arguing that they infringe on the federal power to regulate trades and commerce.
Okay, thanks to Junwei, Kuala, and Hazira for disclosing the concurrent list disputes and some of the legal cases of it. So, it's been a fascinating discussion today on federalism and its challenges in Malaysia. Before we conclude, let's hear some final thoughts from our panelists. Junwei, what do you think?
Yeah, finally, Richard. For me, the federalism is all about the balance between respecting the state's autonomy and ensuring the national unity. Disputes like we already discussed remind us that how vital it is to stay transparent and fair in resolving conflicts. The Constitution is our guide, and we need to uphold it at all the time.
Well said, Junwei. Next, Koala, what's your takeaway?
Okay, for me, federalism is a unique system that allows states like Sabah and Sarawak to protect their identities while being part of the federation. However, the boundaries of power can sometimes blur, leading to dispute. So, it is important to address this challenge with clear laws and mutual respect to strengthen our federation.
Thank you, Koala. And lastly, Hazira, what are your closing remarks?
Thanks, Richard. For me, today's talk highlights the federalism is a living system. It adapts and grows as new challenges arise. Disputes, while challenging, are also opportunities to improve collaboration between federal and state governments. Dialogue and respect for the constitution are essential for us to moving forward.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your thoughtful insights. Guys, federalism isn't always easy, but it's a system that reflects Malaysia's diversity and complexity. It requires constant cooperation and a shared commitment to fairness and unity. To our listeners, we hope you found this discussion engaging and informative. Stay tuned for our next episode on Varsity Cheer Podcast. Bye bye.